All right, let's talk about corporate training. I know, I know. For a lot of us, those words conjure up images of long, boring days and presentations that just seem to drag on forever. You know, that feeling of information going in one ear and right out the other? Well, what if it didn't have to be that way? What if learning could be engaging, effective, and maybe even fun? Today, we're going to dig into a revolutionary approach that completely flipped adult education on its head.
I mean, come on, we've all been there, right? You're stuck in some conference room, the lights are a little too dim, and the presenter is just clicking through slide after slide after slide. It's that classic death by lecture. And you're sitting there, physically in the room, but your mind is just somewhere else entirely. But here's the thing, the real problem isn't just that it's boring. It's that this way of teaching, it just flat out doesn't work. And the numbers really tell the story here. Research shows over and over again that when we just sit back and listen, we forget almost everything. We might hang on to about 20% of what we hear and maybe only 10% of what we read. Just think about that for a second. Companies are spending billions of dollars on training, and a whopping 80 to 90% of that investment could be just vanishing into thin air. It's not just a waste of time, it's a huge waste of money.
So, if the old way is so clearly broken, who's the person who stepped up to fix it? Well, this is where a guy named Bob Pike enters the picture. He's a man who would eventually become known all around the world as the trainer's trainer. And he looked at this problem and saw it for what it was, a total failure to understand and respect how adults actually learn.
But here's the really interesting part. Pike's whole journey started with one of his own massive failures. See, early in his career, he was running this big 3-week training academy, and he did what pretty much every other trainer did. He lectured a lot, and he completely exhausted his participants. He saw with his own two eyes that just talking at people was a dead end. That moment, that failure, that was a light bulb that changed everything for him. So that experience wasn't just some lesson learned, it became his life's mission. He went on to found the Bob Pike Group, and it had one single goal: to figure out a new way to unlock learning and unleash performance. He basically dedicated his entire career to answering that one critical question: how do we make training actually stick? And this right here was his answer. It's such a simple idea, but it's also incredibly profound. It's called instructor-led, participant-centered training. So instead of the trainer being the sage on the stage, the all-knowing expert, they become the guide on the side. The whole focus shifts from the person talking to the people learning. The learner is no longer a passive, empty bucket waiting to be filled up. No, they're an active partner in their own discovery. This quote from Bob Pike himself just perfectly captures the whole spirit of it. The goal isn't for people to walk out of a training session thinking, wow, that trainer was so smart. The goal is for them to walk out thinking, wow, look at what I can do now. It's all about building their confidence in their skills, not just dumping information on them. So, how did he actually turn this philosophy into something people could use? Well, Pike boiled it all down into 5 incredibly simple, super memorable principles. And these aren't some complicated academic theories. They're just fundamental truths about how we, as human beings, really learn best. Now, before we jump into his laws, it's worth pointing out that Pike was really tapping into some ancient wisdom here. This idea that we learn by doing has been around for thousands of years. What Pike did that was so revolutionary was he built an entire system, a repeatable framework around this timeless idea, and applied it to the modern workplace. And here they are, Pike's 5 laws. They have these really fun, quirky names that make them easy to remember. Number 1, adults are babies with big bodies. Basically means we learn best when we can play and discover, just like kids. That leads to number 2, people don't argue with their own data. Let people figure things out for themselves because they'll believe their own conclusions. Of course, the whole process has to be fun, which makes the learning stick and leads to real behavior change. And the ultimate test, you've really learned something when you can turn around and teach it to someone else. Let's just focus on that second law for a moment, because it is so important. Imagine a trainer gets up and says, here are the 5 qualities of a great leader. Okay, you might write them down, but you might also be thinking, says who? The buy-in is pretty low. But what if, instead, the trainer asks the group, in your experience, what makes a great leader? And helps them build the list. Now that's their data. They own it. They believe it instantly. The buy-in is suddenly at 100%. Okay, so the laws make sense, but how do you actually use them in a real training session? Well, this isn't just a philosophy, it's a whole system packed with a deep toolkit of practical, hands on strategies that anyone can use to bring these ideas to life.
Pike created this amazing toolkit for trainers. Take the 90-20-8 rule, for example. It's a super simple but powerful rule for designing any presentation. You should never talk for more than 20 minutes without giving your audience an 8-minute activity to actually engage with the material. It's just a practical little trick that works with how our brains are wired. And that's just one of dozens of techniques, from things called core processes to keep energy levels up, to literally 54 proven alternatives to just lecturing. So this all sounds great in theory, right? But does it actually work in the real world? Well, this is where the story gets really, really good. Because the results you get from using this participant-centered approach aren't just a little bit better. They're absolutely transformational. First off, companies find they can cut their training and design time by 25%. Why? Because the method is just that much more efficient. But here's the one that really matters. The amount of skills that actually make it from the classroom to the real job goes up by a massive 75%. And the reason for all this? It comes down to retention. With these methods, the retention rate just skyrockets from that measly 10 or 20% all the way up to 90%. That's the difference between forgetting something tomorrow and actually understanding it for good.
I mean, just look at this chart. The difference is night and day. On one side, you have that tiny little sliver of knowledge that manages to stick after a typical lecture. And on the other side, that massive retention you get from active, engaged learning. It's not even a competition. It's a completely different way of thinking about what's possible in a training session. So we end with this thought. The Bob Pike revolution proved that training doesn't have to be a chore we all have to endure. It can be dynamic, it can be empowering, and it can be unbelievably effective. It really challenges all of us to stop putting up with passive learning and to start demanding active engagement, whether we're the one teaching or the one learning. Because when you unlock the power of doing, you don't just share knowledge, you truly transform people.